समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
12 soldiers killed this week, 19 last month, 5 the month before. The mountains west of the Indus, the Pakistan army is learning, is the place violent death calls home. This week, the Pakistan army's losses in fighting insurgencies and terrorism have risen to points that are causing it genuine anxiety. The country's threatened Afghanistan with cross-border strikes. There have been rumors of an attack on the Taliban chief Nur Wali Mahsood in Kabul. And leave aside all the froth and speculation, the facts are looking grim. The Pakistan Army's losses in fighting insurgencies and terrorism have risen to 899 this year and could cross the all-time record set in 2019 of 1012. This isn't great publicity for a military that claims to have just defeated India, and it sure wasn't meant to be the script. 4 years ago, when the Taliban stormed through Afghanistan, capturing Kabul, then Inter-Services Intelligence Chief Faiz Hamid swaggered with viceregal confidence through the Serena Hotel in Kabul, promising everything will be okay. Okay. Like so often in the past, reality has proved resistant to the wisdom of governments and experts. Back then, experts were calling on the world to help the Taliban snuff out the Islamic State because they assumed the Islamic Emirate, the Taliban, would be a close ally of Pakistan, which had funded and provided its safe haven for years. Instead, now Islamabad finds itself locked in ferocious combat against the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban, a coalition of mainly Pakistani jihadists which has long been sponsored by the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate and the Islamic Emirate. Confused? Yeah, it's confusing. The Taliban leadership, Pakistan-backed, has proved either unwilling or uninterested in taking on the Tehreek-e-Taliban or the TTP. And Field-Marshal Asim Munir is discovering his troops are in very serious trouble. Launching drone and airstrikes into Afghanistan along with threats of military action and skirmishing along the border have done absolutely nothing to deter the TTP or force the Taliban to act against it. To get a sense of just how much Pakistan's losses hurt, consider this. They're actually higher than the highest losses India ever suffered in Jammu and Kashmir, which was 638 back in the year 2000. Thank you for joining this episode of The Print Explorer, and for regular viewers, my very special thanks. I'm Praveen Swami, contributing editor to The Print, and in this episode I'll be unpacking who the TTP are, what they're actually fighting for in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and why Pakistan seems unable to rein back its clients and get them to behave. The culture of the peoples of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is populated by many imaginary beasts. There's the dragon Azdar, which guards hidden treasure, the giant Barzangi, who appears during hailstorms, the shapeshifter Shirar, which stalks the mountain paths at night. Field Marshal Asim has invented his own mythological beast, calling the TTP the Fitna al-Khwarij, or heretical rebels backed by India. Terrorists are no longer killed. Field Marshal Munir's public relations people say they've been dispatched to hell. This kind of religion-suffused language might console some people, but fairy tales don't defeat insurgencies. The truth about what's going on is deeply complex, and it doesn't give reason to hope any end is in sight for Pakistan. It's hard to know where this story should begin. But April 2004 is a good time. The jihadist Neek Mohammad Wazir stood on a stage near his home in the Shakai Valley, glowing as Pakistan's 11 Corps commander placed an improbably colourful garland around his neck. Whatever happened, happened, the feared jihad commander told Lieutenant General Syed Safdar Hussain. We will not fight each other again. The tribal people, he went on, are Pakistan's atomic bomb. When India attacks Pakistan, if you look into history, you will see the tribals defending 14,000 kilometers of the border. No one can dare attack Pakistan from here, he said. The garland turned out to be a noose. Less than 3 months after the Shakai deal, a Hellfire missile fired from an American drone locked onto Naik Mohammad's home as he was eating lunch, guided by a signal broadcast from a chip planted by an agent. It was the Central Intelligence Agency's first drone strike in Pakistan, carried out on the basis of what we now know was a secret Pakistani request. Following 9/11, you see, the large numbers of Pakistanis who had served with the Taliban's first Islamic Emirate poured south across the border and were granted safe havens in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In 2004, the United States pushed the then ruler of Pakistan, General Pervez Musharraf, into opening operations against Arab, Chechen and Uzbek jihadists operating from Pakistan's South Waziristan agency, who were creating a real threat across the border in Afghanistan. That offensive by Pakistan proved disastrous. The Pakistan's army had neither the will nor the counterinsurgency skills to take on men it had, until 9/11, considered its strategic partners and best friends. Facing severe losses, Musharraf sold the United States the idea that he could instead co-opt the jihadi leadership using his intelligence service, the ISI. This game seemed at first to work. In April 2004, Naik Mohammed agreed to sever his support to the armies of Arab, Chechen and Uzbek jihadists in the Shakai Valley. In return, Pakistan's armed forces called off their offensive. Just a few days later, though, the Shakai agreement unravelled. Naik Mohammed refused to hand over foreign jihadists and began assassinating traditional tribal leaders who competed with him for power. Naik Mohammed's story helps understand why that happened and why talking to the Taliban hasn't and probably won't ever work. Put simply, Naik Mohammed used the jihadist movement to seize power at gunpoint, something he had no prospect of doing either through electoral means or through the traditional tribal structure. The deals were a great way to show the population that even the government feared and respected the jihadists. But men like Naik Mohammed understood that peace, if it actually came, would threaten their newfound power. There are several expert accounts that claim the Taliban are tribal rebels against the Pakistani state. That's true, but they're also rebels against the traditional order in the Pashtun borderlands. The son of a small landlord from the village of Kalosha in South Waziristan, Naik Mohammed belonged to a generation of young men with some education and a little wealth who were impatient with the traditional power structure. He received a schooling at an influential Islamist-controlled seminary, the Jamia Darul Uloom, before going to study at a college run by the secular nationalist Pakhtunkhwa Awami Party. He dropped out of college soon after, though, and set up a shop in the main bazaar of Wana, that's South Waziristan's main town. Less than 18 years old at the time, Naik Mohammed then volunteered for service with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. He was operating alongside the Taliban by 1995 or 1996, and he became very close friends with the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan chief Tahir Yaldashev and the Uyghur jihadist Hassan Mohsin. Following the events of 9/11, Naik Mohammed returned to Waziristan. He came back with his guns, and so it was easy to grab power in the Shakai Valley, backed as he was by this old Al-Qaeda contacts among the Uzbeks and Chechens. Pakistan's army, still hoping it would one day plant the Taliban back in power in Kabul, wasn't displeased with these jihadists now taking asylum in its territories. Every peace deal like Shakai ended the same way, and for pretty much the same reasons though. In February 2005, the Pakistan army signed a peace deal with Baitullah Mahsood, the then chief of the Taliban operating in the Srargoha area of South Waziristan. This deal didn't make it incumbent on the Taliban to give up their guns or surrender foreign fighters linked to Al-Qaeda. Even then, clashes broke out inside months. Then, in August 2009, another CIA drone eliminated Baitullah Mahsood. But his successor, Hakimullah Mahsood, went on to be enormously powerful. He died in turn, but of course now you have Nur Wali Masood. Perhaps the most unsuccessful peace effort involved Maulana Fazlullah, whose jihadists banned Swats, girls from schools and unveiled women from the streets. In July 2007, Pakistan's armed forces raided the Lal Masjid, a seminary from where Islamists had begun projecting power inside Islamabad itself. The Chinese came down like a ton of bricks on General Pervez Musharraf's government and forced him to act against the Lal Masjid jihadis. The violence continued into 2008 when the Awami National Party-led coalition government, which former Prime Minister Imran Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf would later defeat, took power in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. The Awami National Party jumped into negotiations just like the army had been doing and Imran Khan was to do. The two sides signed a 16-point agreement on May 21 that year, 2008. Inside of 4 weeks though, Fazlullah resumed attacking government offices, schools, shops and civilians. In February 2009, a desperate ANP gave in and agreed to implement the Sharia-based Nizam-e-Adal laws, in effect conceding Fazlullah's demand for a Sharia-governed mini-state. Floggings, beheadings and suicide bombings replaced the law. The jihadists soon overran Mingora, Swat's commercial center, and in May 2009 took over the towns of Buner and Shangla. Finally, with the Taliban just 60 kilometers from Islamabad, the army had to step in. Fazlullah fled, but the killings continued. The ANP, which struck the peace deal, was literally forced out of the election contest by murderous attacks which claimed the lives of hundreds of its members. Former Prime Minister Imran Khan thought this made the Taliban, the Tehreek-e-Taliban that is, good allies and started to revive peace talks, pushing for the idea for at least 5 years before he finally took office in 2018. He should have listened to people who were watching the situation on the ground. None of the agreements with the Taliban factions involved in attacks in Pakistan lasted for more than a few months, and the breaking of each agreement resulted in severe bouts of violence, including attacks on government institutions, security forces and civilians, wrote the journalist Daud Khatak in a superb article. Leaders across South Asia have gone down pretty much the same road as Khan, seduced by the hope that they can buy up the support of religious and ethnic extremists. Witness Indira Gandhi's romance with Jarnail Singh Bhidrawale or Rajiv Gandhi's flirtation with the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. All these leaders have learned that riding the tiger also means you're the nearest meal at hand. Pakistan's army seemed to finally learn this lesson in 2014 when jihadists attacked the army public school in Peshawar, killing 144 people, mostly children and their teachers. The army now launched an offensive which pushed the TTP back into Afghanistan and tried to destroy its infrastructure. Even as this operation was going on though, Imran Khan was persuaded by the ISI to reopen the door to talks. Faiz Hamid, the ISI chief, organized for top TTP commander Muslim Khan to be secretly flown out of death row at a military prison in Pakistan in 2022 into the custody of the Afghan Taliban, who were asked to guarantee his good behavior. Faiz also put together plans for the rehabilitation of jihadists in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as part of a deal which was meant to cede some political power to jihadist commanders in return for their giving up their arms or at least not attacking the army. The ISI for the nth time got a ceasefire, but the terrorists soon began beheadings, public executions and ambushes against the police. The country's National Counter-Terrorism Authority, NACTA, observed that the ceasefire allowed the Tehreek-e-Taliban to resume recruitment as well. Tehreek-e-Taliban units demonstrated they could siege lethal attacks far outside Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, staging suicide bombings in Islamabad and other cities. All of this raises An obvious question which isn't easy to answer. Why do TTP commanders keep fighting instead of just taking the local power deals the ISI offers them? After all, their chance of overrunning the Pakistani state are pretty low. Economic historian Tirthankar Roy, who is a very eminent scholar at the London School of Economics, helps understand why war is a way of life in the Afghanistan-Pakistan borderlands. Imperial powers balked at the cost of expanding into Afghanistan, he noted, which meant that authority in that country was never centralized as it was in other resource-poor regions of Asia like India itself. The country was thus never integrated into the maritime trading system, that is, the ties between the interior coastal cities like Mumbai or Chennai and the trading system that powered the Industrial Revolution across the world. Lacking revenues, Roy observes, I quote, governments running the country from Kabul could never impose their writ over the entire country. And in turn, local warlords who effectively ruled different pockets of the country had to fight with their own communities to impose taxes, call it extortion if you like, whether that was from small-scale mining, from transport, or from shopkeepers. The jihadists who controlled the most wealth could buy the most guns and hire the most soldiers and thus expand his territory and get more revenue. You get the idea. From time to time, various outside or internal powers have succeeded in imposing central authority, but brutally. Like a goat between two lions, Amir Abdul Rahman, the ruler who built modern Afghanistan, said of his nation's fate, a grain of wheat between two strong millstones of a grinding wheel. Rebellions had raged across Amir Abdul Rahman Khan's kingdom, 17 in his 15 years as king, led by clerics and tribal elites who were enraged by his efforts to end their privileges and subsidies. From their eyries, Britain and Russia watched these events. In the Amir's evocative phrase, like hungry vultures anxious to swallow their weak victim. He went on, I had to put in order all these hundreds of petty chiefs, plunderers, robbers and cutthroats who were the cause of everlasting trouble in Afghanistan. His campaign saw thousands massacred and entire populations shifted to alter regional demographics. To build this order though and to end war, Amir Abdul Rahman also had to invest in an ever larger, ever hungrier military. That meant there was no money left over for infrastructure, education, communication or transport. As a result, there could be no urbanization, which was the driver of economic development. And even today, that's pretty much the story. I'm sure you've all read these roseate accounts that appear periodically about trillions of dollars in mineral wealth being available in Pakistan. And some people insist these mineral resources will one day allow Afghanistan to become rich. There is no definitive survey though that has really proven the existence of these reserves, and the circumstances aren't exactly conducive to economic activity. Why would you spend millions of dollars after all on security for a copper or bauxite mine when you can buy these things very easily on the open international market elsewhere? All of this means Afghanistan just doesn't have the resources to crush the TTP. And even if it did, it has no incentive to jump into a war that will probably eat its resources and end in a stalemate. Even if Pakistan bombs border villages using its air force every now and then, the Islamic Emirate, that is the Afghan Taliban, also know Field-Marshal Asim doesn't have the economic or military wherewithal to conquer Afghanistan. Islamabad, after all, doesn't seem to have a big chance of succeeding where great powers like the Soviet Union and the United States failed. The Pakistan army, for its part, know it's being bled by terrorism. But knowing it can't win a decisive military victory, it hopes to cut a deal with enough jihadist factions to bring about something resembling peace. This would probably mean ceding territory to the TTP, setting it up de facto nation states for the jihadis, but that isn't an outcome the generals necessarily see as bad. The jihadists are, after all, bitter enemies of secular nationalist movements like the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which seeks federal autonomy. The jihadists, the generals hope, can be persuaded to serve as loyal vassals of the state, propped up by subsidies and grants of the kind the British Empire once offered regional chieftains and clerics. For 2 decades, though, this hope of a stable deal has gone nowhere. There's no sign Field-Marshal Asim has the imagination or the resolve to accept reality and try to carve out a new path. Thank you again for watching this episode of The Print Explorer.